What the flick? How are you? Tim, Francis, we're here for Walking Dead Season 7, Episode 10, New Best Friends. Rick makes some, apparently, new best friends. I would disagree with that title, but maybe we'll find the truth to it. A lot of interesting things happened this episode. I think that it was one of the stronger episodes, but it certainly had its flaws. Let's start with the kingdom and the saviors.
Yes.
This is where the episode starts. So I will say that I think this episode was paced well. I think sometimes The Walking Dead suffers from staying on one storyline too long and leaving one to rot somewhere else. And I think being able to see both Daryl and Richard deal with the saviors and in the kingdom, a little bit of Carol and Morgan, and then flopping over to the Rick's group and the group that he meets was paced pretty well. It held my attention, both storylines, the whole time.
I think that in previous Walking Dead episodes, they could have just stuck with Daryl and Richard and just kind of went through the process and kind of lost our interest halfway out. But I actually loved that they went back and displayed what Rick and everyone else was up to. And I feel like that's kind of setting the tone for what the second half of the season is going to be about. There's not going to be a lot of filler episodes, I think, because they have so much to get to unless they want to drag out the Saviors and Negan into another season. I feel like this needs to be moved pretty swiftly. They need to figure out what the plan is going to be in place. And that storyline of Richard, Daryl, and their fight against the Saviors was the more interesting storyline for me, because when you ended the last episode with Rick smiling, you're kind of already given a trail into what this next episode is going to be. It's going to be a kind of, I didn't expect it to be whole Gladiator-esque is what it was, with him trying to, as we'll touch on, I'm sure, but I really did like the fact that Daryl and Richard were kind of toying with what they could do to goad Ezekiel into making a decision, you know, because at the start of the episode we see them come into contact with the Saviors again, them taking more than what they were expected to take, them questioning the load just for the sake of questioning it, because this is a relationship that Ezekiel thinks is going to be held up on both sides, but the Saviors are just going to keep pushing until they can take more, until there's nothing left to take, and then you're kind of butting heads at that point. But
So we see Richard's plan, and he shares it with Daryl because he knows that he and Daryl both think that the kingdom should join Alexandria in the war against the Saviors. And it's a little bit what most conspiracy theories boil down to. The good guys let something bad happen to goad the good guys in charge into action.
Yes.
You know, that's what people think Pearl Harbor was, and the two towers for 9/11. But in this one, Richard really wants Carol to get hurt or die, because she's living on her own and she doesn't matter, so that Ezekiel takes action. He thinks that it's part of the greater good. Daryl doesn't like that, obviously.
Clearly
He's
not.
One of Carol's close friends, so he stops Richard's plan.
Yeah, I feel like in this episode we get a lot from Daryl, and I think that we've been needing that. Because to be honest, I didn't think we got enough character development for Daryl, even though he was in a lot of episodes when he was with the Saviors. Yeah, we saw him kind of transition and really struggle, but I feel like this episode was a reminder of how much he's grown in this world, you know, like from the earlier on. Like, the fact is, without jumping too ahead in the episode, I'm sure we'll get to it, he just makes decisions that show a sense of maturity and show a sense of understanding the bigger picture for someone close to him, rather than just getting the easy option. Because, you know, Carol can be a weapon. Like a very strong weapon.
Yeah, and I get frustrated when people hide the truth, for the most part. He decides to give Carol a mercy and not tell her about the Saviors killing their groups, because Carol doesn't want to fight anymore, and he knows that telling her what the Saviors are capable of will make her want to fight again.
And more than that, I think she feels that personal loss, right? Because that's one of the reasons why she wants to detach herself, because she said, I can't lose anyone.
Yeah.
So if Daryl was to tell her, we lost Glenn and Abraham, I think that would force her into a really struggling point once again, because it seems like she's trying to find some sort of peace. Do I buy it that she's going to remain that way? I don't know, but at least for that moment in that scene, I think Daryl understood that she was like pleading to him, don't give me a reason to kind of fall over the edge again.
Yeah, I guess you know, he could read the room, paint it on her face. I don't agree with Daryl's decision there, but it's a fine decision. It makes sense in the world and in the context here. Let's talk about some things that don't make a ton of sense.
Okay.
So we meet a little more in depth this group that Rick and company
Do
stumbled
they have a
upon.
name, or are we just going to call them scrapyard people?
Yeah, the junkyard folks, the emo army. I don't know.
The emo.
They wear all black. They're very somber. They don't have a lot of expression.
Straight cut hair.
Yeah. So this whole story arc seems to me like a trip back to the 80s, which is weird. Okay. So we have Jadis, who looks like a knockoff Mila Jovovich from
I was going to say that from Resident Evil.
Yeah, okay, so
right on this.
the writers of this episode were like, hey, let's draw on some other post-apocalyptic movies.
And if you have her, the actual person, you don't need anything else, because she's badass. She would take the saviors if we were talking about the real lady
This
from Resident
group
Evil.
well, I mean, we'll get to the where they are plot-wise in a second. But it's a weird departure from The Walking Dead that we know. And I want to talk for a second about suspension of disbelief, because it's so important for these shows for them to craft the right amount of suspension of disbelief. You could say something like, Tim, why would you have a problem with this when there are zombies? Like, it's a fantasy show. Get over it. The writers of the show, and what makes Walking Dead so good at times, is that they give you what I consider to be a believable portrayal of what would happen if zombies were real. Mm-hmm. The first season is great at painting real-world reactions, how people would actually act if this fantasy thing happened. What this group is and what they represent is not that, because this is only a few years into the apocalypse. Schools were still a thing. You shouldn't have this whole group that is incapable of using complete sentences. This very much like Lord of the Flies, like Thunderdome-esque, like these speech patterns that these people are using are very like archaic and brutal, what is it? I have it on this page. Guns soon, deal expire. We wait, we take, no bother. What is that? That doesn't belong in the world that you've created.
I found it as strange as you've perfectly explained. It was, but we also need to understand that this is a world where we've just been introduced to a community that's bought into a kingdom with a tiger.
That's fine. You know what? They explain the tiger. Tigers are a thing. There was one in a zoo. He rescued it. I'll buy it. It's
but
weird,
it doesn't explain.
But I buy it. It's something that a person might do in the zombie apocalypse. Forgetting how to use language is not something people would do.
Yeah.
Being this, fine, live in a junkyard, that's fine. Be scavengers, that's fine. I believe that. But when everyone agrees to stop talking like everyone else is talking, you stick out like a sore thumb. In a world of sore thumbs, I feel like you stick out.
I feel like someone's screaming behind the camera at us because we haven't read the comics, that this is something that is further explained and there's some sort of in-depth deal that we don't understand that's going on between them. Maybe there's a reason why they speak this way. Maybe it was code. Maybe it was something that we didn't understand. So, yeah, I thought it was a little strange. It didn't detract away from the kind of humor aspect of the episode, that Rick was just
it was
jolly.
A fun episode.
He was kind of happy that he went all Maximus on some
he got a gladiator
zombie
fight with a straight out of Resident Evil spiky zombie, which was cool. It was fun.
Yeah.
It reminded me of other zombie movies. Yeah. But why would you borrow from those movies when you're creating your own world, Walking Dead? Like the 80s synth ambiance music was like, okay, we get it. You understand what some people like about zombie movies, about post-apocalyptic movies. You're borrowing a little of that straight out of the 80s. It just doesn't work for me. It felt weird. And now, granted, it's part of the plot that they're getting this group to help fight the Saviors, which I also disagree with, because they've shown you they're not fighters, they're waiters and takers.
Yeah, they just
I don't know why you're trusting them, Rick. They've led you...
Collateral damage.
Yeah.
No, that's what I'm thinking.
They don't seem trustworthy at all. Okay, so they're cannon fodder. He's going to throw them
That's
at
what
the
I
Saviors.
think. That's what I think.
Fine. Maybe that's the case, or maybe they take your guns and leave.
Because the last point I want to highlight is we're kind of detracting away from how ruthless Rick used to be because he was broken. I think he has a plan in mind where he's thinking, this is a man that bit off a man's face because he was about to kill his son, or bit off his neck. This is a guy who you don't just, those feelings don't just disintegrate because he was scared that a ruthless killer came around. Those are boiling. He's going to hit that point again where he's going to be like, you know what? These people in the scrapyard, they are completely okay with being our protection or our shield. We'll send them out to track the Saviors, and then we'll take what's ours and we'll go and win. That's what I think.
Well, that's this episode. Love it or hate it. It was interesting, and we'll see you next week.
know that.